Quick story. The Industrial Revolution used to be in Social 20. And we had a unit called the 3 I's: imperialism, ideologies, and, you guessed it, the Industrial Revolution. And it was an amazing unit. And the unit had a lot of preloading for Social 30, because in Social 30 we talked about ideologies and economics again. So these ideas came back. But then when we reshuffled the curriculum in 2007, things got moved around, and the Industrial Revolution to some extent fell down to Social 10. And as you can see in the textbook, with only 2 pages, pages 122, 132, being dedicated to it, it's kind of a missed opportunity here. So we're spending some extra time on a topic. And that's the glory of courses that are somewhat site-based and locally directed, in the sense that I can put some questions on the Industrial Revolution on your midterm and on your final exam, because there's no government final in Social 10. So I want to overemphasize this topic, because I think it really shapes the global village, so it fits in with globalization, and it's stuff you need to know for Social 30. So, at the end of this lesson on the Industrial Revolution, I want you to be able to connect it back to mercantilism. And I want you to connect mercantilism, the Industrial Revolution, and imperialism all together, and with globalization. I want you to understand the transforming nature of the Industrial Revolution. I want you to be able to see it as it relates to that topic we're looking at all year, the zero-sum theory and realism. And I want you to see how the Industrial Revolution creates disparity and therefore will inspire ideological responses like Marxism that we'll study tomorrow. So lots of ambitious things to do. So taking a little step back. So we studied mercantilism, or mercantilism, and we even watched the video with the guy that looks like Jason Bourne. And again, mercantilism was a part of the zero-sum competition among the major powers of Europe, that they needed to have exclusive ability to control vast stores of resources. So they created colonies. They created spheres of influence where they had exclusive economic rights. And in this competition, we had things like the triangle trade, where the British had colonies in North America growing things like tobacco. And the British were also cultivating sugar in the Caribbean. But they didn't have enough workers. There weren't enough indigenous workers that they could pacify. So they needed to get workers. So they take the cotton and the sugar from the Americas back to Europe, where it would be manufactured into things like t-shirts, into textiles, into clothing. And then they take the textiles and the rum down to Africa and trade it along the slave coast here for workers, and then they bring workers to the Americas. And this was the triangle trade. This is mercantilism. And the first connection we're trying to make is, how is there a connection between mercantilism and the Industrial Revolution? Well, one of the main goal of mercantilism is to get rich. So what is the Industrial Revolution? The Industrial Revolution is refining our production so we can produce more. There's a logical overlap here. If I can make more stuff, then I will be able to create more wealth. So the connection between mercantilism and the Industrial Revolution is, the goal of mercantilism is to collect more wealth, to generate more wealth, and the Industrial Revolution will help make that possible, because it's going to allow an increase in production. Another overlap between mercantilism and the Industrial Revolution is, as we know, England is the birthplace in the Industrial Revolution, but England is also limited in terms of resources that they have. England's not Canada, it's not Russia, it's not a vast area. And therefore they need resources to be imported. We need to get stuff. The building blocks of the Industrial Revolution, some of it are local, but some of it lie outside of England's borders. So they need to bring things like indigo in. So that's why you create a colony in India, so that you can bring Indian indigo to Europe, to England, to make textiles. So another overlap between the Industrial Revolution and mercantilism is the English, to keep growing their Industrial Revolution, they're going to need resources from outside England. And mercantilism will help them get that. They're going to need beaver pelts from Canada. They're going to need indigo from India. They're going to need ivory. They're going to need rubber. These are things that are not native to England. So the Columbian Exchange has opened up the possibility of seeing resources that are not native to your territory, resources that may be the building block of making your economy bigger. So mercantilism will also lead to imperialism, because once you're in an area economically, you may want to not legitimize, but strengthen your presence there. I don't want to use the word legitimize because there's a connotation with that, saying the British have a right to be in India. But what you want to do is make sure that you strengthen it. The Black Hole of Calcutta showed how vulnerable the British East India Company was. But as we learned today, the British end up taking $45 trillion from India. So they're going to need something to be there, some boots on the ground that can protect their economic activities. So how do we get British troops garrisoned in India? We're going to have to make it into a colony. So mercantilism, the Industrial Revolution, and imperialism are all swimming together. They're all feeding each other. And how does it connect to globalization? Well, globalization is the interconnectedness of mankind. So why are they connecting, is the question. What's the motivation? Why are British people connecting with Indian people? Well, they're connecting because of mercantilism. They're in a competition with France, with Spain and Portugal, the zero-sum theory. How much gold can we have? That's why they're connecting. How are they connecting? Well, mercantilism, we also saw in the movie Gandhi, the idea of the farmers complaining about the relationship they had with their landlords. That's how we're connecting. It's a system of exploitation. And ultimately, we're connecting through imperialism. So I think that if you look at the Industrial Revolution and mercantilism and imperialism, you can look at some of the hows and whys of globalization in this post-Columbus, pre-World War II time period. From the late 15th century to the mid-20th century, this is really the motivators, the catalysts, the drivers of globalization. I love this next quote. It's straight out of the Social 30 textbook. The Industrial Revolution will be remembered as the moment when humanity lost its soul and we abandoned each other in the blind pursuit of self-interest, self-profit. Each day, our poor skin opens less and less to fresh air, sunlight, the touch of others, the smell of pine, rain, compost, and manure. And instead, we find ourselves hunched over machines in the standard posture of reverence, bowing our heads to the humming and warm computer pets that rest on our laps or in our palms. We are breeding a new generation of human beings who will learn more from a machine than from their mothers. So that's the type of source you can see on a multiple-choice test. And it's like, well, what's the ideological perspective here? Do they like the Industrial Revolution? Do they not like the Industrial Revolution? How do we know? What's the evidence within the source? What's the sentence that says that they like it or they don't like it? And what kind of society would they prefer? So they're missing manure. They're missing rain. They want an agrarian society. They want to be living on the farm. Not a mechanized farm either. They want to be out there working by hand. So their utopian paradise would be a de-industrialized world. A simpler world, more common of the pre-industrial era. So, next up, we're going to go to a crash course video. And, John Green is fairly entertaining, but at times he's also educational. And he's going to begin the video by really describing how the Industrial Revolution transformed our lives. Because that's our next point. We need to look at the transforming nature, right? Understand the transforming nature of the Industrial Revolution. And this quote introduces that topic of how it changed us in a negative way. But John Green's also going to talk about how it's changed us, not just in a micro, but us as a plural, macro, societal level way. So we'll go to that next. We're also going to look at the concept of urbanization. Because with the Industrial Revolution, what was necessary was the city creation, urbanization. And we'll take a peek at that today. By the time we get done those two things, it'll probably be mask break time. And then after the mask break, we'll come back, we'll analyze some sources. We'll see if we can see some perspectives and connect it to the Industrial Revolution. So, here we go. I don't know, I kind of feel like just keeping the video going. Let's watch John Green together. There's got to be some copyright infringement happening right now, but.
Hi, I'm John Green, and this is Crash Course European History. So we're going
Dude's got a nice beard. He's not going
to turn our attention today to the Industrial Revolution, one of the most significant developments in human history. Like, imagine with me that it's 1820. I got this idea from the economist Robert Gordon, by the way. You live in, say, England. You probably work in agriculture. When you walk to town, you're either pulling your own cart, or if you're lucky, you have a horse. You have no running water or electricity. When you wash your few items of clothing, you do so by hand. You cook over a fire. You think of time not primarily in minutes and hours, but mostly in relationship to solar cycles, how close it is to night, or to morning, or to midwinter. And in all these respects, your life in 1820 is basically identical to the lives of people in 1720 or 1520, or for that matter, 1220.
So his first point is that, early on, in that early industrial era, when our lives haven't been changed much, our lives were quite simple, right? So he's trying to establish, what do we have that they didn't? We have electricity, we have running water, we have, a more time-orientated schedule.
Now, that's not to say that nothing has changed in those hundreds of years. As we've explored in this series, lots has changed. But as Gregory Clark observed, in terms of standard of living, Europeans in 1800 basically led lives similar to those of Neanderthals.
That's a huge statement. So standard of living, we haven't really changed since the Neolithic era, right? Neanderthals basically died out during that last ice age before the Neolithic era. Beginning of our course chronologically. So in 12,000 years, our lives haven't really changed that much. So what has changed our lives? The Industrial Revolution.
Now imagine that you close your eyes in 1820 and wake up in 1920. By now, most people in England do not work in agriculture. They may work in shops or transportation or mining or workshops or in factories. They measure time in minutes. Cars exist. Some people have radios which transmit information through thin air. A few people even have refrigerators which dramatically decrease food spoilage and the risk of foodborne illness. Occasionally, you might even see an airplane flying in the sky. Oh, and also your country has just emerged from an astonishingly deadly war fought with highly lethal weapons like chlorine gas, weapons that people of 1820 could not possibly have imagined.
So in that clip, now we're seeing that there's a cost to modernization and mechanization. The destruction of World War I would not have been possible without the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution allows World War I to be as bloody as it was. There's literally machine guns, right? The Gatling gun can shoot 900 rounds a minute. That's a lot of casualties. But at the same time, we now have refrigerators, so we can combat things like disease that would have been possible without refrigeration because the food might spoil. We have transportation. So in the pre-industrial and early industrial times, your whole life may be defined by a very small patch of this planet. There was no global village. But we have a global village today because of the Industrial Revolution. Because of the Industrial Revolution, you, maybe not right now during a pandemic, but you could fly to anywhere on Earth, really, within 2 or 3 days. You want to even go to Nepal, you could get there, depending upon connecting flights and things like that. You could be standing at the base of Everest within 3 days. That global village is because of the Industrial Revolution, because of planes and trains and automobiles, and not the John Candy movie.
Welcome to the Industrial Revolution.
So, while we're watching this, keep thinking strong do what they can and weak suffer what they must, right? Keep looking for that too.
In this series, we've already talked about revolutions in agriculture that increased European productivity and revolutions in trade that increasingly distributed goods among people in towns and cities instead of having each individual family produce everything it needed. And these forces combined to help create more division of labor, like farmers could focus on farming and textile workers could focus on textile creation, which was more efficient than having each family do every kind of work. So let's begin in the 18th century, when European industrial production is said to have begun. Europe's population was growing after centuries of non-stop wars and plagues and the worst of the Little Ice Age. Meanwhile, products such as coffee and tea and chocolate made with heated water killed bacteria, while products from abroad expanded and varied the pool of nutrients, with corn and potatoes, for instance, generally being more calorie-dense per acre than wheat. In short, lives were getting better and longer, and populations were rising, and this meant that, on average, people had a little more time to learn and tinker and experiment. Many different artisans invented small improvements to existing mechanical devices. Perhaps most famously, John Kay's flying shuttle increased the pace and productivity of weaving. Weavers then needed a greater amount of thread, so tinkerers made that happen by producing inventions such as the spinning jenny, created around 1764 by craftsman James Hargreaves. The spinning jenny was a machine used by individual women working at home, and it allowed a person using just the power of their hand to spin not one bobbin of thread, but up to 120 at once. In England, Ellen Hacking and her husband John were among those devising carding machines to straighten cotton and wool fibers for spinning, and at about the same time, Richard Arkwright and his partners invented the water frame, another kind of spinning machine that used water power. And when spinning machines could be linked to a central power source, such as water, many could be placed in a single building, so the world's first factories arose, in part from the pressure to increase production of English cloth for global and domestic markets.
So we're seeing the mechanization, the centralization of production, right? Mechanization, we're going to use machines to increase production. Centralization, we're going to put factories together. Mechanization and centralization of production, why do we need it? Well, because we have this big market. We have a lot of consumers wanting our product. We need to increase production because we need to get enough clothes for all of India. There's 350 million people in India. That's a lot of clothes that we could sell them, a lot of profit we could make. So because of imperialism, it's driving the Industrial Revolution because there's opportunity. But we still need resources from outside of India as well, outside of England as well. So it creates the need to keep expanding imperialism and mercantilism. It's a very unfortunate pause for John Green. So hopefully you're seeing the connection, and we're also seeing the transformation, right? And one of the neat things that we're seeing here is this transformation would not have been possible without the Columbian Exchange. So, hey, we have more time to sit back and invent things. Why do we have more time? Because we're eating potatoes instead of wheat, and potatoes have more caloric value per acre. So now we have less people that need to farm because potatoes feed more people than wheat. So now instead of having a village of 100 people and 98 of them are farmers, we have a village of 100 people and 80 of them are farmers. We've got some people sitting around just inventing stuff, like machines. So you can make the argument, no Columbian Exchange, no Industrial Revolution in 1716 in England.
Did the center of the world just open? Is one of my polo shirts in there? This cost like $41. Twice a year I go to a polo outlet in southern Indiana and just buy as many of these things as they'll sell to me. And look, I'm not here to advertise polo shirts, but this thing is incredibly comfortable, and also it's like dyed a specific color. Everything about this was completely unimaginable in the early 19th century. In fact, you know what? It's so soft to the touch, I think I'm gonna put it on. Is that weird? Oh yeah, I feel like I'm a bad guy in an 80s movie. How do I look, Stan? Oh, Stan says I look like Steve Bannon. Okay, thus ends that experiment. Back to the show. Let's talk about porcelain. Another tinkerer was the alchemist Johann Friedrich Böttger, who promised the king of Saxony that he could figure out how to make porcelain. Porcelain was such an obsession that wealthy people collected it, and even those with far less would try to buy a piece or two, like a cup or a plate, as we see in many Dutch, French, and other paintings. Two things you see a lot in European paintings of the affluent or those who aspired to affluence: porcelain and pineapples, which were also quite rare and expensive and difficult to produce domestically.
Have you ever been at a party and somebody brings a pineapple just to brag about their wealth? It's like, hey, look, Joey brought a pineapple. Dude is loaded. People used to rent pineapples because you couldn't afford to buy one, but you'd rent one so that you could take it to a social gathering and display how wealthy you are. That's right, I got a pineapple. Now pineapples are like $3.99. Why? Globalization.
Porcelain was also practical because Europeans didn't know other ways to make heat-resistant dishware for their hot drinks. So Böttger was virtually imprisoned until around 1708 when he finally figured out how to make porcelain, although not as beautifully as the Chinese or Japanese did. What we're trying to get at here is that while people love a great story of an inventor and their invention, the Industrial Revolution was the result of lots and lots of people working together, making a series of incremental improvements rather than like geniuses from on high creating amazing things. The real genius of humans is collaboration and also spying. Like, for instance, industrial spies helped with every development in the Industrial Revolution because other regions were far more advanced than Europe in manufacturing, for instance, color-fast dyes, or heat-resistant dishware, or fine weaving and spinning, or even metallurgy.
So for globalization, the Europeans travel the world, find good ideas, steal them, bring them back to Europe, and make something new with them. That's a very European thing to do.
For example, mostly copied designs from imported textiles, and it was those cotton textiles that really caught the imagination of consumers and filled pockets first of the people who imported textiles from India and China, and then of the daring manufacturers who were successful at copying the lightweight and colorful and washable cotton clothing. But industrial production of cotton was really risky. Like, the rate of business failure during the Industrial Revolution was over 50%, and because of that, experimenting manufacturers worked to keep labor costs as low as they could.
Think about it. Okay, so there's a big risk here for those who own the machines. Failure is like 50%. So we have to keep working costs, labor costs low. You see the essay here. Strong do what they can, weak suffer what they must. Who's going to be the weak? The workers, the laborers, the people working in the factory. The strong, the people owning the factories. What do we call people who own factories? We end up calling them capitalists. We call them entrepreneurs. So what we see now in Europe, because of the Industrial Revolution, is a new class struggle between the owners of the factories and the workers. And Karl Marx called the workers the proletariat, and he'll call the owners the bourgeoisie, which would have sounded way better without the mask. I would have nailed the French on that without the mask. The mask makes my French really bad. Otherwise, I'm like, I parlez-vous français quite très bien, oui? I don't know, but it's the mask getting in my way. But other than that, yeah, we're seeing this new application of survival of the fittest. The idea that the strong want to become stronger, so the capitalists, the bourgeoisie, they want to become stronger, so they have to feed on their workers. They have to devalue their workers by paying them very low wages. And the workers, the proletariat, Marx suggests, and we'll see this more tomorrow, eventually they'll figure out, man, we're being exploited here. They'll they'll have an epiphany and they'll rise up and there'll be a violent worker-led revolution that will change the world.
One way was to use unpaid orphans from government or religious or charity.
Dude, if that doesn't scream feeding on the weak, man, you know what? I need to make more money. Who in our society can I take advantage of? Hey, do we got any orphans? You know, children who lost their parents? That sounds like some easy source of vulnerable people that I could exploit as workers. I'll pay them very low because who's going to defend their interests? They have no one, they're orphans, and I'm going to get rich.
Charitable institutions as labor. At a time when people didn't know a lot about steam-powered machinery and its dangers, industrial accidents happened all the time, and children were often the victims.
This essay, come on, they're writing the essay for you again. You have so much evidence. Now you just got to get some argumentation to see purpose of your evidence. You probably have pages of evidence, right? Industrial accidents happened all the time. Well, the weak suffer what they must.
Children worked incredibly long hours and deaths were common. Little Mary Richards was caught up in a machine, and 6- and 7-year-old orphans working alongside her witnessed the, quote, bones of her arms, legs, thighs, etc. successively snap. Her head appeared dashed to pieces, her blood thrown about like water from a twirled mop.
A little graphic, yes. Or as he says, very graphic. But yeah, we have a lot of testimony from this time period about the exploitation. And to some extent, the exploitation still exists today. That the exploitation you would have seen in factories in Manchester and Leeds, in England of the 19th century, you can see in Pakistan today. You can see in Indonesia today. You can see in Vietnam today. You can see in China today.
Now, I know that's very graphic, but I think it's important to understand the extent of industrial oppression, including the industrial oppression of children. Workers lost arms and eyes and fingers or were otherwise disfigured. Production and profits always came first in an attempt to avoid financial ruin. And industry had other repercussions. It initially increased the demand for slaves even more. For instance, slaves produced food for workers who had left farms for factories. Slaves also produced tropical crops such as sugar and tobacco and coffee that boosted the energy of many types of workers, and slaves produced the palm and other tropical oils to keep machinery running, as well as the raw materials for industry.
So, as we've said, these things keep fueling each other. Now we have the Industrial Revolution. Wow, we need more slaves because we need our workers to have coffee because they need something to keep going. Because these children are working 16-hour days. And, you know, when you're 6 years old, that's a lot. So let's feed our 6-year-olds some coffee to keep them going.
Especially cotton. It's important to understand that industry thrived due to slave labor and inexpensive child labor, and also through the labor of women who were paid less than men. Over time,
so in England, because women and children were getting the jobs, many men found themselves unemployed. So in England, this is the birth in the mid-19th century, the pub culture. Meaning the dudes, the guys, what are you doing today, Joey? Going down to the pub. Because they don't have a job, they don't have a purpose. So there's economic change created by the Industrial Revolution, but there's also here social change. Because the family dynamic was changing, because the kids were the ones making the money, or the wife, the mom was the one making the money, and the dad wasn't. So what did dad do? What was his purpose? He's going to go drink. The English became a pub culture. I'm just offending everyone today. But they did.
More and more people began working in industrialized settings or in economic sectors that supported industry, due in part to the development of the steam engine. In 1776, English inventor James Watt launched a steam engine that improved earlier models. Now, as far back as Roman Egypt and then Ottoman Egypt and China, people had known about steam engines, but Watt's engine was much more efficient, which made it useful in replacing animal and water power, not not just in mines, but also powering textile factories and then other machinery. For millennia, almost all human power came from our muscles. Then we harnessed some animal power and eventually some wind and water power. But steam power completely revolutionized how much work could be done on behalf of humans, and also, of course, changed transportation when it was attached to covered and uncovered wagons and ships to make trains and steamships and eventually automobiles. And the train created in turn another kind of demand, because as urbanization soared around railway hubs, small and grand train stations were built along with all the other buildings needed to house the railway's primary and secondary employees. By secondary employees, I mean it wasn't just like station masters and ticket sellers and conductors. There was also a need for shopkeepers and pharmacists and construction workers and teachers and doctors and drivers of coaches, not to mention sanitation workers, police, and urban administrators.
So what we're seeing with the Industrial Revolution is a multiplying effect, that you're not just creating jobs in the factory, that with the factory jobs you create other supporting positions, like the ones he just listed, and this is how cities grow. So if Wetaskiwin ever becomes the city it says that it is, the city in motion, how do we become the city in motion? We need to create employment opportunities here. You know, if we had some factories relocate here, factories like Supreme and Manluck, they create jobs. People that work there, not everyone that works there, but a lot of them that work there live in town. And then those who live in town, they need groceries. They need a haircut. So now we have Moe's Barbershop. It just relocated from the mall down to the new, area, the new strip mall that's where the tourist center used to be, at the corner of Main Street and Highway 2A. So, hey, a little plug for Moe's today. Because you can tell by my hair, I probably go there a lot. Great barber.
Industrialization had a snowball effect, and it wasn't going to be turned back. And all of this meant that everyday life was profoundly transformed. Like, two classes became much more prominent alongside the aristocracy and peasants in the social structure: the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or working class. The bourgeoisie initially referred to people who lived in towns and cities, or burgs, or bourges. But the term came to refer to those who owned factories or banks or transportation networks, or also large tracts of land for raising livestock and crops. The proletariat comprised the many factory and other workers who lacked tools or land to support themselves, but instead labored for factory owners and others who had the means to produce. In between were the rising professional groups called the middle class in Europe, doctors and lawyers and teachers and others with special skills that serviced society as a whole. We'll see this configuration change over the next couple centuries and watch as tensions unfold among these groups and, at times, boil over. Women also experienced a transformation of everyday life. Like in the preceding centuries, they had generally worked on farms or in workshops alongside their artisan husbands, or on their own as hat makers and seamstresses, and weavers and spinners. During the early days of industrialization, women who had been spinning or weaving at home often switched to factories, and they did many other kinds of work. For example, 18-year-old Anne Egley, with her younger sister, worked 12-hour days in the coal mines, pushing carriages filled with 800 pounds of coal.
So these coal mines were often quite small on the inside, so most men couldn't fit in them. So they employed women and mostly children, and they called the children hurriers, because they would push these carts of coal. And they were meant to hurry because, the faster you can do it, the more money you're going to make. A lot of casualties, a lot of kids buried alive.
Which was then used to make steam power. She had done this kind of work from the age of 7. I don't know if you know any 7-year-olds, but they should not be working in coal mines. Now, you'll recall that the French and American revolutions, with their emphasis on motherhood and laws stripping women of their property, led to women being discouraged from work. But many continued to do so even when their wages belonged to their husbands. Factories also created and still create outwork done by women at home. polishing knives or painting porcelain buttons, for example. But ideology simultaneously shifted to say that women were to be the angels in the household, providing comfort from the various horrors of industrial life, a cultural norm that discouraged women from working outside the home. In the meantime, the classes became aware of their individual identities. The French had outlawed guilds during the Revolution, but industrial and other workers formed their own clubs to protect their interests. They created singing, gymnastic, and sports clubs. This is why early English football teams, for instance, had names like Royal Engineers AFC and Civil Service FC. These groups also often had a lively cafe culture where they discussed politics and read newspapers, often aloud to their comrades because each cafe usually only had one newspaper. Manufacturers and wealthy individuals in cities likewise formed groups based on their common class position. They founded chambers of commerce to protect their financial interests and museums to show off their city's achievements and good taste. Let's go to the thought bubble. Initially, the rise of factories saw those left out of industrial work life, such as artisans and small farmers, protest by breaking machinery or threatening to do so. The swing riots in Britain are one example of what has been called primitive rebellion. Instead of dealing with change by organizing to benefit from and shape the change, so-called primitive rebels went about breaking things. Wreckers of machinery were called Luddites, as they still are today, because menacing notes found alongside sabotage were often signed Ned Ludd. Ludd was an inspirational figure, a weaver who allegedly smashed a textile machine in the 18th century. But gradually, workers inside the factories formed mutual aid societies and eventually unions that negotiated for better terms with owners. And when negotiations failed, they went on strike as a group instead of wrecking the machines with which they earned their living.
So quick pause. The unions is an attempt of the weak to become stronger. So individually we're weak, but collectively we might be stronger. So we can bargain collectively. We can take action collectively. We don't like the conditions in the factory. Well, if I go to the factory owner and complain, he's going to say, you're fired. You're replaceable. We have hundreds of people that want your job. But if everyone in the factory joins a union and we collectively say, we're unhappy with these conditions, he doesn't want to replace all of us. That'll be a disruption of labor. It's hard to train an entire new staff. So we might be able to get some concessions. We might be able to get some better working conditions, maybe shorter hours, maybe better pay, maybe some safety measures put into place. So unions are an example of the weak, recognizing that in numbers they can become stronger. This essay, it's just everything, right? Everything we've done fits into it.
Living. All in all, industrialization wreaked havoc on people's lives, even as it provided many with livelihoods. Towns grew astronomically. Like the textile center Manchester, England, went from 20,000 people in the 1750s to 400,000 a century later. Conditions in Manchester were abominable, including the development of slums and the spread of disease. They came to lack fresh and safe supplies of water, garbage and sewage, not to mention animal excrement, filled muddy streets, creating, in the words of one commentator, a universal atmosphere of filth and stink.
So this universal atmosphere of filth and stink is testimony that this urbanization doesn't come without a cost. And temporarily, in the early stage of the Industrial Revolution, life expectancy will go down because the environment that people are living in will be more toxic because of the rapid population of cities. Literally, you'll have outbreaks of cholera and Ebola because of the lack of sanitation. Cities couldn't keep up, creating new sewers and stuff. So people were just dumping raw human sewage out of their windows. And that's why men, when they're walking with a lady, should walk closer or further from the building so that they're the ones getting hit by the sewage, not the lady. So, yeah. That's what that's all about.
And conditions in other industrial cities hardly differed. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So, industrialization began in England and the Low Countries, in part thanks to the capital raised by worldwide trade, and because that trade made possible successful imitation of foreign products. But industrialization then spread. It traveled the continent through the 19th century, although it was less dense in Eastern Europe. There, many peasants continued to live hand to mouth, but as we've seen, so did the poor in industrial cities. So was the Industrial Revolution really a revolution? Well, if a revolution is an event full of impact on people's lives, then definitely. But often historians look at revolutions as, like, ending, which the Industrial Revolution really hasn't. Unlike the comparatively brief English Revolution or American Revolution, many see the Industrial Revolution as continuing to make dramatic changes in our way of life today. Today, we expect technologies to change dramatically in our lifetimes. We expect to use different tools to communicate and work than our parents used. But that expectation is only a couple hundred years old. It makes you wonder, if you closed your eyes in 2020 and woke up in 2120, how weird is the world going to be? Oh, thinking about that is stressing me out. Next time we'll look further at the cultural and political aspects of industrialization. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Crash Course is filmed here in the...
Alright, so that's a natural time for a break. I know it's 7 minutes early, but I think now's probably a good time to do our mass break. Not as sunny as it will be later in the afternoon, so you may want to take a coat with you, and I'll see you outside in a moment.